So welcome everybody. This is Blue Denim Press's occasional series of author interviews. We don't do this all the time. We do this whenever we have good books worth talking about. My name is Shane Joseph. I'm the publisher of Blue Denim Press, and it's my pleasure to welcome Beverley Brewer, author of Dance into the Light, a memoir that we published last year in the fall. And let me introduce you to Bev. Beverley Brewer's training in life skills teaching methodology set the stage for her work. She completed her PhD at the University of Toronto. Bev is a member of the Muskoka Authors Association and lives in Muskoka with her husband and 2 black labs. So welcome, Bev.
Thank you, Shane. Glad to be here.
Well, it's been a long road. I was intimately involved with this book from, I guess, start to finish. And I can imagine it must have been a rather exhausting and cathartic experience. Can you tell us a little bit about the emotional journey that you went through as you were writing this book?
Sure. I'll start with telling you the exact moment when I knew I was going to write the book. I was sitting across the room from a cognitive behavioral therapist, and we were in our 3rd or 4th session. We were making some headway in my recovery after finding my sister the way I did. And I said to her, I have to write about this. And she said, I hope you do, because families need your book. So at the time when I decided I was going to write the book, I didn't think about how exhausting it might be or how cathartic it might be for me. I can tell you now that there were lots of ups and downs. I laughed and I cried, and I didn't do this alone. Once I got over the raw response to my sister's death and some of the other things that were going on in my life, my husband was recovering from 4th-stage cancer, and my dad was newly widowed, and so there's a lot going on. I felt ready to write. I didn't want to write this memoir when I was totally raw. And I knew I didn't want to do it alone. So I called a therapist up who, Dr. Denisoff, had retired. So she gave me the name of someone else. And I liked the sound of this woman the moment I heard her voice. And I told her that I'm a suicide loss survivor and that I wanted to write a memoir, but I didn't want to do it by myself, just in case something came up. Now, did something come up? Not really, but there were some chapters that were harder to write than others. And one particular chapter that was very hard for me to write, in fact, I procrastinated a lot about it. I didn't write this memoir, Shane, you'll know this, chronologically. I wrote it all over the place. And the chapter about the night that I found Jacqueline dead in my father's den was a tough one. And when I finally got around to writing it and editing it to the best of my ability, I told my therapist that, and she said, okay, Bev, now put it away and don't look at it again. Now, she's not a writer, but that's what she said to me. But I didn't look at it again just until the time that I sent it to you, Shane, and I edited it again, and there you have it. The other thing I think that got me through the turmoil and the ups and downs was that I worked with a trusted friend in the experience of writing this memoir. My friend Gail Lindsay was also my thesis writing partner. So we knew each other really well, and we both wrote narratively. We studied narrative inquiry, and the trust was very deep. And she was writing a memoir too. So on a bi-weekly basis, mostly, we got together, we read each other's work, we worked over Zoom, and she supported me as I did her in writing the tough story. I don't recommend doing this memoir writing about tough things alone.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Is there a message that you want people to take away when they close the book?
I think there's a few messages. It's a multi-layered story. It's got a lot of things were happening at the same time. And the first thing that I mean, the story's dark at times, and I've had people tell me that. But I've heard the feedback that it was good to see that I got through a dark tunnel. So getting through the darkness, and then seeing that somebody like me, a normal person I didn't ask for any of this to happen, I managed through the ups and downs to feel pretty healthy in the end. So I like that song that Rita McNeil sings, "The Only Way Out is Through." I think that's true. And I think that's what I did. So the other thing that I think people might see in my book is that I really had a community of supporters around me. I was very fortunate. Not everybody has that. You can make up your own community. I mean, I had a great friend in my own personal journal. So that was something that I hope people will take away. But something that's come up lately when people have told me about the book, they've written me sort of just out of the blue about having read the book, is about the secret. Some people, when there's suicide in their family, don't tell anyone. In fact, this one particular woman said to me, I mean, I worked with her years ago and I thought she was the most stoic woman and her life was picture perfect. But she said to me, "Bev, when we were working together, my brother took his life. And my mother swore me to secret. I was not allowed to tell anyone. This is a grown woman. At this point, she was 52 years old, but she was adhering to her mother's wishes. And she thanked me for my courage to write so explicitly about my loss, and my self-disclosure about how I felt really helped her. So I hope that people will take that away, that secrets, how unhealthy secrets are.
Very interesting. Now, let me ask you the tough question. I know you tried very hard to save Jacqueline. You pulled her out of a lot of tough situations, and in fact, put yourself into some of those tough situations. But despite all your best efforts, could you really have saved your sister?
Well, that is a tough question. Thanks for asking. No. But I didn't know that at the time. And it's not that I thought I was superwoman or anything. I thought that my deep love and that our at one time tight relationship would bring her back to who I knew her to be. And I learned a lot about tough love. I'm not good at it. If Jacqueline were still around, I probably still wouldn't be good at it. In fact, there's a story in my book about tough love. And, you see how miserably I failed at that. But I would certainly approach it differently. I had so many people say to me, "Bev, leave her, she needs to hit bottom." And I was looking around her and I thought, well, as far as I was concerned, she'd already hit bottom. But these are deep learning curves that no one expects to know. And it's easy to say, the person's not ready. She needs to hit bottom. And given my, frankly, I'd helped pull a lot of other people, students, out of these kinds of deep holes. And yes, I'm sad to my core that I couldn't help my sister because she wasn't willing to make the change. She didn't want to live anymore. She was tired.
I had to ask the question because I know there's a lot of people who play the kind of the guardian angel, and they try to salvage people and think they can do it, and then they beat themselves up later on with guilt when they fail. And sometimes some situations are just irredeemable, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is a tough subject, and you've been going around, reading and launching your book. I've been to 3 of your events, and they've been well attended. Lots of interested, audiences. But at the same time, this is a tough subject. How do you talk about alcoholism, suicide, cancer, elder care, mental health, all in one package to a packed audience who's come for an afternoon of entertainment?
Oh. Um, I think I really read the room. And there was one particular launch I went to. You weren't there, and hardly anybody else was there either. It was in Kinmount, and I went with a friend and my husband. And there started out to be three people in the room, and one person got up and left. She looked quite stressed. I was reading her face, and she didn't say anything. She left. She reminded me of the students I used to work with. When they didn't like what was being talked about, they left, and I never chased after them. And of course, I wasn't going to chase after this woman. There were two people left in the room, one on one side and one on the other. And my interviewer was asking me questions, and I'm talking away. And then I notice the woman on the left side of the room slide over to the other side and sit beside the woman that was sitting there alone. And she took her hand, and tears were streaming down both women's faces. So I just stopped and I said, "Have you recently lost someone?" And she said yes. Her daughter had jumped out of an airplane. Mm-hmm. And it was a very complicated story. And so instead of listening to my story, we talked about her story. And I really thought that was the right thing to do. Now, that was a very small audience. And if it were to happen in a larger audience and someone was entertained, invited me in to engage in that level of conversation, I would seize the moment. So how do I handle the topics? Really carefully, tenderly. I watch the audience. I try to be very empathetic. I met someone on my cottage road the other day, and she had read the book, and she gave me a huge hug. She says, "I think you need a hug after what you've been through." So I took the hug with grace. I loved getting her big warm hug. And then she said, as she stepped by, "Weren't you angry?" I was really angry when I read your book. And I said, "No, I wasn't. Sometimes I was mad at my sister, and I was frustrated at my sister. I was mad as hell at my husband's cancer, but none of it was anything to do with the person. It was cancer is an illness, mental health is an illness, alcoholism is an illness. So I was only angry at the illnesses, but not at the person." So I keep that in mind as well. And as I listen to this person, she's got a sister in her life who she's taking care of in a different kind of way. She has different kind of addictions, not alcohol, but other kinds of addictions. And she's very, very angry at her sister. So I know that each person brings their own story to my book, and there might be some projection happening when they might want to put that anger onto me. I've also had people say to me, "You must have felt guilty." No, I never felt guilty, because I personally felt that I did everything I could for my sister. So I guess as I talk about this book at launches and other places, I think I'm kind of ready for whatever comes up. And I'm thinking about being a careful, tender listener.
It's very good. I'm going to hold this book up one more time. So this is for everyone to take a look at. This is a good primer on how to deal with the curveballs that life throws at us. Sometimes they come in ones, sometimes they come in legions, as I think was the saying in Shakespeare. And we can't be the arbiters or the controllers of that. We just have to deal with them as and when they come. And so this book hopefully will help someone deal with whatever curveballs are thrown their way. So now let's leave the book for a while, Bev, and let's talk about the other side of this equation, that is the writer and the writing. What drove you to become a writer? Did you grow up with that desire from childhood, or were there influences along the way as you proceeded through life? How did you fall upon being a writer?
Well, there wasn't a lot of reading in my house when I grew up. But there was storytelling. And my mother instead of reading to my sister and I, she had this story about Betty Lou, and I really wish somebody had written those stories down, because I'm pretty sure they were autobiographical. Betty Lou was like a Dennis the Menace. Did you know Dennis the Menace? I mean, he just got into trouble which way he went. And so eventually I became the storyteller, and to both of my sisters, because by then Jacqueline was born, and she was just as interested in Betty Lou as Mel was. So I think I kind of inherited my imagination, that anything can happen in writing, and my character development. I love character development, from my mother. But I didn't really, other than academic writing, I didn't do much writing, and for creative writing. And it was when I got into grad school and I was introduced to narrative inquiry, which is the study of personal experience. And my thesis advisor, Dr. Michael Conley, complimented me on my ability to write prose. And I was quite taken aback like that, because frankly, I didn't think I was a good writer. And it takes me a long time to write. Writing does not come easy to me. And so on retirement, I just took up writing, and I thought I would write short stories, not for anybody else to read. And then I went to critique groups, writing circles on a Saturday morning up on Bayview, and I got more positive feedback. And this particular story that I wrote, which came from a dream, was called No One Knew, and it's supposed to be a short story, but now it's 4,072 words. So I guess I have two people in my life who influenced me: my mother, and my thesis advisor.
Good. Now, this is a strange industry, the writing industry. I'm been in it myself, where you really don't need a diploma or a certificate in training. Everybody claims to be a writer, right? There's a whole bunch of self-published writers out there, and everybody's writing a novel. And it seems like it's a status thing to do, that at a certain point in life, after you've achieved all your life goals, you've got to sit down and write a book. But there has to be some learning of the craft. How do you feel? How important is it? And are you more convinced now, after you've gone through this whole process of writing a book and going through the editing and the publishing process? How convinced are you now that there needs to be some training in craft in order to produce a book?
Oh, yeah, no, I always knew that there had to be training and someone to help oversee what not just grammar, but how to structure the story. And I did actually start the U of T writing course, but I think it was too soon after I did my doctorate, and I was up to here with courses, and I did an intensive course in the summer, and it was all too serious, and I thought, well, this isn't for me. But what I enjoyed a lot was I took writing courses from authors, award-winning authors mostly, in their own living rooms and in the backyards and at retreats. And I really enjoyed sort of that sense of community that happened among struggling writers, wannabe writers, and the master writer. And I'm glad I spent the time doing that. Receiving the feedback and the constructive criticism from anybody who would give it to me. I see you, Shane, as a teacher in my writing. I've told you that I learned a lot from you, and you taught me a lot about sequencing, even though we might not have come to, I think we compromised on the sequencing within this novel, within this memoir. But no, I'm absolutely convinced that people talk about writing being a lonely craft, and it is, but I do think that it's kind of egotistical to think it can do it entirely alone. Although Stephen King says he doesn't share any of his writing with anyone except his wife until he's absolutely finished, but that's a different story.
There's only one Stephen King.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual, the nitty-gritty of it. I mean, do you plan and structure your work, or do you go with the flow?
I kind of go with the flow, but then I suffer for it later. And then I go to the planning stage. And I think the reason why I start with the flow, like I mentioned earlier, that no one knew, my suspense novels started from a very dark dream. And I had to write that down, and I thought it was going to be a short story. But then once it got bigger, I started plotting it out. And this room that I'm sitting in right now had index sticky paper all over the place. And I did that with my memoir as well. Of course, I knew how the memoir was going to end, but I couldn't write it without a structure. And I used a lifeline, and to keep me straight, because the dates were mind-boggling. And I think with No One Knew, I have too many characters, so that was mind-boggling. So I'm back actually to mapping that one out again too. So if you don't structure at the beginning and spend time on planning, I think, at least for me, it's something that you end up doing.
Let's talk about research. And this is something I've noticed a lot with authors. There is a tendency to want to, especially in fiction, and I know your book is not about fiction, although you're writing fiction now. There is a tendency to want to get everything right and factual. And the trap is sometimes that they put in too much of the research material into the novel. And suddenly you wonder whether this is a novel or whether this is a treatise on something. So how do you approach research, and how much of it do you actually think you will use when you actually write the book?
Yeah, I like that question. I've never been someone who could be accused of getting lost and bogged down in research. I mean, for No One Knew, I left the writing for a while because I decided my Linda character was going to be anorexic, and I didn't know enough about anorexia to continue the writing. And so I actually enjoyed that research. It's very, very dark research. I discovered things I would rather not know that's on the internet about anorexia, and how people support other people in becoming anorexic. But that's another story as well. I think the research can get in the way sometimes, like what you alluded to. For my memoir, of course, I did some research on mental health statistics and suicide stats and alcoholism. And I did not want the muddiness or the straightforwardness of the statistics to get in the way of the levels of stories of the experience. So yeah, so I could tell you how many people die from suicide a year, or suffer from mental health issues, but that wasn't really the reason I was writing the story. I wanted the kind of the very essence and the core of the experience to get on the page. And so in my case, research doesn't get in the way too much. But I do admire people that do it, but I support them in not doing too much of it.
Yeah, no, it's a fine balance. Depending on the nature of what you're writing, you might put in more research into a memoir or nonfiction book rather than into a fiction book. But there is always the tendency to overcompensate and put in more than is actually required. So let's one final question. What kind of writing discipline do you do? Do you like do it while you're walking the dogs, or are you a 9 to 5er that you sit there and you work, or are you an all-nighter who kind of burns the midnight oil and drinks 60 cups of coffee like the French writers?
I do drink a lot of coffee, and I never drink alcohol when I write either. No, like Hemingway used to talk about. I'm a bit of a 9 to 5er, and I don't have a problem with discipline, and I don't believe in writer's block. If I can't come up with a solution, I do go for a walk with my dogs. I use physical exercise to refuel me. My problem is I sit too long. I can, and I've had carpal tunnel in my wrists and sore backs from sitting too long. So I have to. My husband is very good about this. He will phone. I work in my cabin, and he will phone me and he'll say, coffee's on. And sometimes he annoys me because I'm into something, but I'm onto something and it's disruptive. But I go for the coffee. And the way I write is I write as much as I can in a day until I think I'm done. And then when I come back the next morning, I go back to the writing that I've done the day before. And sometimes I edit it a lot, but I always get grounded in yesterday's writing before I carry on. I'm a constant editor. I don't leave the editing to the end. I can't stand that.
Yeah, no,
I have to
that's
keep fixing things.
that's a good practice. I have the same thing. I mean, I find if I'm on a spree, I would write, 6 to 8 pages. If I'm in a really big spree, I might write 12 pages, but I find the next day that the last 3 or 4 pages are probably not very good.
Mhm.
So I end up throwing it away. And the middle part was the best. You take a little while to get started and you're pushing it towards the end, but the middle is really good. So no, that's good. I'm good to hear that you're a 9 to 5er. That shows also that one's taking this thing seriously, right? This is not just a hobby thing. It's a vocation.
Yeah, it really is.
So on that note, Bev, I'll just show the book up again one more time. This is available wherever good books are sold, so you can order them online in electronic format or in paperback format. And as I said, it's a good primer on dealing with life's curveballs that are thrown to us with not of our asking. And so, Bev, thank you very much for talking to us today, and viewers, thank you for watching. And tune in again for one of our other occasional chats with authors writing from the heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.